Hi everyone! Welcome to week 3 of the Exploding Heart Quilt Along. I'm so glad you're still sewing along. Last week was all about sewing the blocks, and this week we're going to trim them up. If you sewed your blocks after cutting them out with an AccuQuilt cutter, then you have this week off. Your blocks don't need any trimming whatsoever. It's like the greatest part about having an AccuQuilt. So you get your time off. You don't have to do this. But if you have sewn your blocks using any other method that we talked about last week, then you need to trim them to be the right size. And so I'm going to show you several different techniques for doing that, whether you have any tools on hand or not. Okay, so the first way I'm going to show you, you actually don't press the final seam open, you leave them shut, okay, to use this tool. And it is called a Clearly Perfect Slotted Trimmer. So this is meant for half square triangles, but it works for quarter square triangles too. So you just don't press that final seam, and then the ruler, it's kind of triangle shaped with these extra slots on the side. I don't know, can you see that? So it has some horizontal lines across the ruler, and then it also has those slots on the side. So I don't actually have the correct size for the pattern, but I can show you how this would work. So you're going to line up the seam that you have sewn across this side with one of the dotted lines on the ruler, and then you line up the perpendicular line with the seam line that you've sewn. Okay, so you line up both seam lines with the lines of the ruler, and then you cut on both sides, and then it also has the slots, and so what you do is you cut into those slots on both sides, and what that does is it cuts off the dog ears for you, so that when you press it, it is the right size. Okay, so that's one tool that you can use for trimming half square triangles and quarter square triangles. It was called the Clearly Perfect Slotted Trimmer. Okay, you can get that like on Amazon or at a quilt shop. Then the next tool that this is the one I use. If I'm not using my AccuQuilt cutter, then I'm using a block lock ruler, and I love these. These are really fantastic. So on these, you do press your block that you're going to be cutting, and then you can use the exact size or you can use a size larger. So I actually have several sizes of these. So if I was using the correct size for the pattern, then the block lock ruler has this groove cut out of the back. Like, I know you can't see it in the video, but there's a groove cut on the back of the ruler. So what that does is that when you put it on the quilt block, it locks against the seam. Like, it won't go past the seam line that you sewed. So it makes it stay in place. It doesn't wiggle when you try to cut. It stays right along the seam with that groove. It's pretty great. And then you just line up the 4 corners with the 4 seam lines of your block. And then you can cut on all 4 sides. Now, I don't like to cut the sides near me. I'm not comfortable doing that. So you can use a rotating cutting mat so that you don't have to move the ruler. And then you can cut the other 2 sides. And then that trims your blocks to the right size with that tool. So that was using a block lock ruler. This is a block lock for half square triangles. They do make them for like flying geese and a couple other shapes, but this one's meant for half square triangles, and it works for quarter square triangles too. Okay, and if you're going to use a block lock ruler that's too big, that's the wrong size, then what you do is you line it up, get it on here to the right side, however my seam is going. Okay, so you would line it up, but then you can't use the corners of the ruler to find the corners of the block. So what you need to do is find the center of what you need. So like these are 4.5 inches. So the center would be 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. And then I like to use like a wipe off marker to just put a dot right there so that I can put the dot in the center. So instead of using the 4 corners to line up, I would just use the dot and put it in the center of the block and then put this point in line with that seam. And the block lock makes that very easy to line that up. So then once you have the dot in the center of your block, then you would trim 2 sides and then take the ruler off, flip the block around, and then you would do the same thing again. You would need to line up that center dot and put your block lock ruler like locked back into place, and then you would trim these other 2 sides. Okay. Now, if you don't have a block lock ruler, then you could use any size square ruler that you do have to trim them. And what I like to do is add tape to like make my own version of a block lock ruler. This is actually drywall tape that I got out of our garage, but you can use painter's tape or even like medical tape out of a first aid kit. So whatever kind of tape that you have will probably work. So you line the edge of the tape up with the diagonal line on your ruler. And if you're using painter's tape, you might want to do 2 or 3 layers of it, but you just make sure the edge goes straight across the diagonal line of your ruler. And then I just use the rotary cutter to cut the extra tape off of the 2 sides. So what this does is it makes your own block lock ruler from a square ruler that you already have. So what you do is the same thing we did before. It kind of locks, the tape acts as that lock along the diagonal seam. And then you would need to mark the center, which for this, if we're doing 4 1/2 inch blocks, the center would be 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. So right there is where I would put like a dot to show the center. And then mine has this diagonal line or where your tape line would be. Then you have the center. You know that this diagonal line is lined up. Then you can cut these 2 sides. Okay, and then you would rotate it and you do the same thing. So you want to get that 2 1/4 inch center in the center of the block lined up, and then line up your diagonal, and then you can trim the other 2 sides. Okay, that's how you would use a ruler that is not the right size and does not have any fun features. You can make some features for yourself that can help. Now, if you don't have a square ruler, you just have a regular rectangular cutting ruler, you can use that to square your blocks too. So this one that I like to use, this is called an Olipfa ruler. You just need to make sure that it's wider than what size you're making. So if we're making 4 1/2 inches, we just need like a 4 1/2 inch or wider ruler. So this one is 5 inches wide. And this one also has the lines marked both horizontally and vertically, which is really helpful in finding that center point. So like I had said before, you would need to find 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 to find the center of the block. And then this one also has a diagonal line, which really helps to line that up. So once you have that center point found and the diagonal is lined up, or this top corner at least, so the center and the corner, then you would trim those 2 sides. Okay, then you would either rotate the mat, or if you don't have a rotating mat, you would just turn your block to the other 2 sides that need trimmed. You line up that center dot again, and either your diagonal line or just this top point, whatever you have on your ruler. So I have my center and the point is in place. So then I can cut the other 2 sides, and that one is also trimmed. Now, if you have almost none of those features on your ruler, so this ruler here is a rectangle. It is wide enough for what I need, but if you see, it only has lines going one direction, not both. And it doesn't even have a good diagonal line from the corner. Sorry, I don't know if you can see that very good, sorry. It doesn't have a diagonal line from the corner of the ruler and no lines to show me where like that 2 1/4 would be. So you can still use this ruler too. So you would need to find the 2 1/4 spot, 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 spot. And again, I'd like to mark that with like a wipe off marker so I can find it really quickly every time. So you would put the center dot, whatever that was that you determined, like for this is 2 1/4. So you would put that in the center of the block, and then you need to line up this top corner with the diagonal seam. So you're checking 2 spots, the center, sorry, I know there's a reflection on there, I'm trying hard to make that go away. You would find the center, and then this top point needs to be in line with the diagonal. So if you have those 2 points in place, then you can trim. Oh, it wiggled on me. That's why the block lock's really great, because it doesn't wiggle. I'm trying to video and cut at the same time. Not recommended. Okay, so I have 2 sides cut. Then you would either rotate your mat or you could just move the block, whatever you have. And then again, you have to line up that center 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 little dot, and this top point needs to be on the diagonal. So if you have both of those in place, then you would trim the other 2 sides. And that one is also the right size now. So in the video here, we've already trimmed up lots of blocks in different ways. So whatever you have, that is your task for this week for the quilt along. You need to press and trim your blocks to the right size so that we can start sewing them together next week. So this week, trim all your blocks. Happy quilting!